Okay, so it's April 1st, 2026. We are 33 days into this war in the Middle East. And the official message we're hearing out of the White House, total victory. But as we're about to break down, the reality on the ground tells a very, very different story.
Day after day, the official line is one of supreme confidence. President Trump is telling everyone, especially Wall Street, don't worry, this is almost over, we're getting a deal. It's meant to sound reassuring. But is it true? Yeah, because when you actually start digging into the analysis from military, economic, and geopolitical experts, the picture looks completely different. It's so different, in fact, that it makes you wonder if this victory declaration is maybe the biggest, most dangerous April Fool's joke of all time. All right, let's break this down. First up, let's talk about the military reality. Because beneath all the headlines you're seeing about airstrikes and special ops, the real story isn't about dominance, it's about depletion, a rapid and really dangerous exhaustion. The key idea here is a concept that military analysts are calling kinetic depletion. So what does that mean? Well, it's actually pretty simple. It means you are using your most advanced, most expensive munitions way, way faster than you can possibly build new ones. You are, quite literally, running out of your best ammo on a strategic level. To give you an idea of what this looks like, let me just throw a number at you. 800. That's roughly how many Patriot air defense missiles the U.S. and its allies burned through in just the first 5 days of this conflict. 5 days. And here's where that number gets really insane. The entire planet's industrial base only produces about 750 of these missiles in a full year. So let that sink in. The coalition used more than a year's worth of global production in less than a week. I mean, the math just doesn't work. It is completely unsustainable. And look, this isn't just about Patriots. This is a system-wide problem. The strain has forced the U.S. into what analysts are calling scavenging. They're yanking critical THAAD anti-missile systems out of South Korea, creating a brand new vulnerability over in the Pacific. It's led to allies like Poland just flat out refusing to send their own defense systems to Israel. And on top of it all, over 850 Tomahawk cruise missiles, the workhorse of the U.S. Navy, have been used up in just 4 weeks. The cupboards are getting bare.
So you have this huge air campaign, right? Dubbed Operation Epic Fury. It sounds epic. Over 10,000 targets struck. But here's the kicker. It didn't achieve its main strategic goal. Iran's command and control centers, their retaliatory missile bases buried deep under mountains, what analysts call the Granite Fortress, they're still intact. They're still operational.
So that's the military picture. And that crisis is now triggering a massive global economic shockwave. This has gone way beyond a regional conflict. At this point, it's an economic war, and frankly, all of us are now on the front lines.
Let's talk about the Strait of Hormuz. For decades, it was basically a global public utility, a freeway for about 20% of the world's daily oil. Well, that's over. Iran has effectively weaponized it. They're running it like a sovereign toll road. If you're a partner nation like China, you can pass. For everyone else, it's effectively a blockade. And it's strangling Western economies right at their most vital choke point. So what does that look like in real terms? Here's another number for you. $200. That's the price that a financial powerhouse like BlackRock is projecting for a barrel of oil if this doesn't get resolved immediately. And they're warning this wouldn't just be a downturn, this would trigger a permanent global recession. And this isn't some far-off theoretical problem. The shock is already here. You can see it in the price of diesel, which, is the lifeblood of global logistics. It's what powers the trucks and ships that move everything. We're seeing prices spike 80% in the Philippines, 52% in Australia, and even 41% right here in the US. That cost gets passed on to literally everything you buy. And it's so critical to understand this goes way beyond the gas pump. The Persian Gulf isn't just about oil, it's a massive source for the world's fertilizer. With all that production shut down, the world's fertilizer supply has been crippled. Analysts are now warning that a global food security crisis by the end of this year is no longer a risk, it's an inevitability. So you have this military overextension slamming into this massive economic shock. And what's the result? It's forcing a tectonic and maybe irreversible shift in global power. It's really stunning. Across the board, you hear geopolitical analysts coming to the same conclusion. The era of uncontested American power, the American umbrella, is over. The world is fundamentally changing, right now, in real time, and there's no going back to the way things were before this war started. I mean, just look at how quickly things have fractured. The conflict started with the U.S. just assuming its allies would fall in line. 20 days later, you have the president of Germany standing up and publicly accusing the U.S. and Israel of aggression.
A few days after that, we get credible reports that Russia is actively feeding Iran satellite intel to help them target U.S. assets. And now, we're seeing traditional American allies, desperate for stability, turning to Beijing.
And this isn't just happening internationally. It's fracturing things at home, too. In Europe, there's a growing feeling that they're just a vassal state, stuck paying the crippling economic price for a war they never signed up for. And here in the United States, deep cracks are showing up in the administration's own base. Prominent MAGA figures are resigning in protest, and it's fueling this narrative that the war is only serving a compromised elite, not the American people.
So let's just take stock. Conventional military options are pretty much exhausted. The economy is in a freefall. Alliances are crumbling. Where do we go from here? Well, the focus is now shifting up the escalation ladder, and the next rungs on that ladder are truly catastrophic.
Let me give you one last number: 10. According to nuclear weapons experts, that's how many nuclear bombs Iran could likely build from the enriched uranium they already have. And they could do it in a matter of weeks. Think about the irony here. The very war that was supposed to prevent a nuclear Iran may have just made it an absolute necessity for their survival.
And that, of course, brings us to the ultimate doomsday scenario, Israel's long-rumored Samson option. It's the absolute last resort doctrine. The theory is, if the state itself is facing an existential threat, it will use its unacknowledged nuclear arsenal to bring the whole house down, potentially taking the entire region, and maybe the world with it. But you know what? The threat doesn't even have to be nuclear to be existential. The survival of millions there hangs by a thread. Israel depends on a handful of desalination plants for 80% of its fresh water. A few conventional precision strikes on those facilities, a capability we know Iran has, could make the region uninhabitable almost overnight. And for anyone out there who thinks a nuclear strike could somehow be clean or one-sided, experts like MIT's Professor Theodore Postol are absolutely clear. That is a dangerous fantasy. He warns that retaliation isn't a question of if, but when, and the result, his words, not mine, the death of millions of people on all sides. It's almost unimaginable. So what you have is this enormous gap between the White House's April 1st victory speech and the catastrophic reality on the ground. And it leaves us with one deeply, deeply unsettling question. Standing here on the brink of economic collapse and a potential nuclear exchange, has the world, in just 33 days, already passed the point of no return?
Imagine a $1 billion flying supercomputer.
Right, like the ultimate eye in the sky.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, we are talking about the U.S. military's E-3 Sentry, the AWACS.
Oh, yeah. The one with that massive radar dome strapped to the top.
Yeah, that's the one. It operates at 30,000 feet, and it basically acts as the central nervous system for an entire theater of war. I mean, it sees every incoming missile, it coordinates every fighter jet, directs every ground battery.
So it's completely indispensable.
Totally. Now imagine that untouchable asset just getting swatted out of the air, leaving the most advanced military on Earth completely blind with, get this, just 60 seconds to react to incoming ballistic fire.
Wow. I mean, that is the architectural failure of a military doctrine built entirely on the assumption of, unchallenged technological supremacy. When you strip away that assumption that you will always control the airspace, the whole foundation of modern expeditionary warfare just it begins to fracture.
Right. And that fracture is the reality on the ground this morning. So welcome to today's deep dive into the source material. It is Wednesday, April 1st, 2026.
Which makes it the 33rd day, right?
Yeah, exactly. The 33rd day since the joint kinetic operations by the U.S. and Israel against Iran officially began. And our mission today is to sift through an absolute mountain of new data that has surfaced over the last 48 hours.
And we're pulling from everywhere, right?
Oh, yeah. Geopolitical assessments, open-source military briefings, maritime shipping logs, and some really extensive YouTube interviews with economic and tactical analysts.
Right. And the goal here is to forecast the most likely scenarios for the Middle East over the coming weeks and, trace the direct, unavoidable shockwaves that are already moving through the global supply chains that you, the listener, rely on every day.
Exactly. But to do that properly, we have to establish a strict framework for how we approach all this data.
Yeah, we really do, because the sources we are analyzing today are saturated with highly polarized, politically charged commentary. I mean, you have left-wing critique,
right-wing defense establishment analysis, and these really fractured international perspectives.
Which means we need to be very clear with you.
Right.
We are not endorsing any of these viewpoints. We are not taking sides on the political or military actions of any nation involved.
Not at all. Our sole purpose is to impartially report the data, analyze the mechanisms of what is actually happening, and just synthesize the ideas from the original sources. We present the mechanics, and you draw your own conclusions.
Right. Okay. Let's unpack this. Because the overarching theme of today's analysis is perfectly captured by this really striking title pulled straight from one of our primary geopolitical sources.
Oh, the April Fool's one?
Yeah. The title is 2026-04-01, April's Fool in the White House. Total victory of the U.S. Army in Iran.
It's such a provocative framing because it highlights this profound disconnect between the official diplomatic narrative and the stark logistical reality of a battlefield where the whole concept of escalation dominance has hit a literal physical wall.
Yeah, let's start right there. The illusion of epic fury versus kinetic exhaustion. The sources are highlighting this incredible divergence between Washington's claims and the physical math of the conflict.
Right, because Donald Trump has been posting on Truth Social recently, claiming that Operation Epic Fury has been a resounding success.
Yeah, the official line is that the U.S. and Israel have nearly completely destroyed Iran's defense capabilities, and that American warplanes are flying freely over Iranian airspace.
But that official narrative relies entirely on traditional metrics of destruction, right? I mean, the sources confirm over 10,000 military strikes have been executed in just over a month.
10,000. That is a staggering volume of ordnance.
It is. And the civilian infrastructure damage is catastrophic. The briefings are reporting 80,000 civilian structures damaged, 190 medical centers impacted, and 12 major hospitals completely destroyed.
Wow.
Yeah. So if you measure victory purely by the tonnage of concrete pulverized, sure, the campaign looks successful, but militarily. The strategic objective was regime decapitation and eliminating their retaliatory capabilities. And on those two fronts, the campaign has entirely failed.
Yeah, and the retaliatory numbers absolutely prove it. Iran hasn't been silenced at all. The sources document 87 distinct waves of retaliatory attacks since the operation began.
87 waves after absorbing 10,000 strikes.
Right. How do you absorb that level of punishment from the most advanced air forces on the planet and still fire back with coordinated precision?
Well, what's fascinating here is how you leverage geography to negate technology. The military analysts in our sources point to a massive tactical underestimation of Iran's granite fortress.
The granite fortress. Tell me about that.
So, Western military doctrine is built to destroy reinforced concrete bunkers, right? But Iran didn't build bunkers under the sand. They built missile cities deep inside the Zagros Mountains. And these facilities are buried up to 500 meters deep inside solid, natural granite.
Wait, 500 meters. We are talking over 1,600 feet of solid mountain.
Exactly. And the specific geological metric here is critical. Natural granite is roughly 25 times harder than standard military-grade reinforced concrete.
25 times harder. That's insane. So a Western bunker buster munition like the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator, which is supposed to use its kinetic energy to punch through a concrete roof.
It's basically useless.
Completely useless. It's like bringing a state-of-the-art glass hammer to a granite quarry. The bomb's engineering is brilliant, but the payload just shatters on impact of the environment long before it ever reaches the actual facility.
That analogy makes perfect sense. The tech is expensive, but it shatters on impact. Right. You simply cannot generate enough kinetic force to penetrate 500 meters of igneous rock. And Iran's tactical execution within this environment is what allows for those 87 waves of retaliation.
How exactly are they doing it?
They use these expansive internal rail systems deep inside the mountains. So they load mobile ballistic missile launchers in complete safety, roll them on rails to reinforced surface apertures, fire their volleys, and then pull the launchers back inside, sealing massive blast doors behind them.
Wow. So it's a completely insulated fire and retreat cycle.
Yeah.
By the time U.S. or Israeli satellites or stealth fighters detect the thermal plume and get a firing solution, the launcher is already back under 1,000 feet of rock.
Exactly, which forces the U.S. and Israel into a strictly defensive posture. They can't destroy the bows, so they're forced to try and shoot down the arrows. And this is where the sources are sounding massive alarms about the depletion of Western assets.
Yeah, the burn rate of interceptor munitions is completely unsustainable. We're looking at Patriot missiles and THAAD interceptors, terminal high-altitude area defense systems, which hit ballistic missiles as they re-enter the atmosphere.
Right.
The briefings state that the rate at which these are being fired has entirely decoupled from global annual production capacities. We are burning through them exponentially faster than the West can manufacture them.
And add the offensive expenditures to that. The reports note the U.S. Navy has fired over 850 Tomahawk cruise missiles in a month, which severely depletes tactical stockpiles that take years to replenish.
850 Tomahawks.
Yeah. But honestly, the loss of munitions is secondary to the loss of situational awareness, which brings us back to the AWACS.
The blinding of the hegemon.
Right. The destruction of that E-3 Sentry aircraft at Prince Sultan Air Base isn't just a lost airplane. The sources suggest this FAG was highly sophisticated, reportedly aided by satellite intelligence provided by Russia.
Wait, really? If Russia is providing real-time satellite telemetry to guide Iranian missiles onto U.S. high-value targets, I mean, that is a massive escalation in multipolar proxy warfare.
It's huge, and the AWACS is a $1 billion asset. But cost isn't even the primary issue here. Scarcity is. The U.S. Air Force only has 16 of these airframes left in operational condition.
Only 16 left in the world.
Yes. And the replacement aircraft, the E-7 Wedgetail, has a projected unit cost of $700 million and is plagued by years of developmental delays, so there is no backup on the assembly line ready to roll out tomorrow.
So what happens when you lose that central radar node?
Well, combined with the destruction of high-altitude radar systems in Qatar, it creates a massive vulnerability. Military analysts note that Israel's warning window for incoming warheads has been compressed to a mere 60 seconds.
60 seconds. That's all they get to detect, track, assign an interceptor, fire, and hope for a hit.
Exactly. And the reality for U.S. personnel on the ground in the Persian Gulf is just as precarious. Without reliable interceptor umbrellas, these heavily fortified military bases transform from strongholds into static targets.
Yeah, the sources actually report that U.S. operators have been forced to formally evacuate 13 military bases across the Gulf.
13 bases evacuated.
It is surreal reading these dispatch reports. You have highly trained military operators essentially working remotely out of leased hotels and commercial office spaces because their multi-billion-dollar bases are simply too dangerous to occupy.
It really is wild, but this aerial and ballistic stalemate over the Gulf has a secondary consequence. Because the skies remain contested, the ground realities in neighboring zones have drastically intensified.
Right, because the failure to achieve kinetic dominance centrally forces pressure outward, which brings us to Lebanon, right?
Exactly. The Israel Defense Forces, the IDF, are being stretched to their absolute breaking point, attempting to secure the northern front in Lebanon.
The mobilization numbers alone are just staggering. The sources note Israel has called up an additional 400,000 reserve soldiers, and that is layered on top of an initial mobilization of 300,000.
Right, so that's 700,000 working-age individuals removed from a highly specialized, tech-heavy economy.
The macroeconomic consequences of that have to be devastating.
Absolutely. Logistics chains, educational systems, the civilian tech sector, they all effectively paralyze. An economy cannot function when its workforce is universally deployed to a multi-front conflict.
And the strain isn't just economic, it's institutional. The briefings feature a dire internal warning delivered by the IDF Chief of Staff directly to the Israeli Security Cabinet.
Oh, 10 red flags.
Yeah, he explicitly stated that the army is on the verge of imploding under the logistical and psychological weight of this sustained mobilization. He raised 10 specific red flags regarding unit cohesion, equipment maintenance, and troop exhaustion.
And the tactical reality in southern Lebanon illustrates exactly why. Hezbollah has fundamentally adapted its operational doctrine since the 2006 conflict. Analysts and the sources are calling it a mosaic defense.
Mosaic defense. What does that actually look like on the ground?
Well, first, they completely abandoned traditional electronic communications.
Wow, really?
Yeah. You can't track a radio frequency or hack a cell phone network if the adversary just isn't using them. They decentralized command and control. Instead of top-down battalions, they operate as localized autonomous cells embedded in the topography.
So they are relying on physical runners and localized planning.
Exactly. This low-tech, highly disciplined infantry approach is systematically neutralizing Israel's technological armor advantages. The anti-armor statistics in the reports are brutal. They report the destruction of 21 advanced Merkava tanks in a single day of fighting.
21 in a single day.
Yeah, and over 100 of these main battle tanks have been rendered inoperable since the invasion began.
But wait, the Merkava has the Trophy Active Protection System, right? It's supposed to intercept incoming anti-tank missiles.
It does, but Mosaic defense tactics bypass it by swarming the tanks from concealed tunnel apertures and firing from within the minimum arming distance of the tank's defensive sensors.
Logically, if the military is stretched so incredibly thin that it's facing collapse, why push for territorial expansion? Why wouldn't you just secure your established borders and conserve forces?
That's the tension between military reality and ideological ambition. The political commentary in our sources highlights deep internal divisions within Israeli society. Many civilians just want a negotiated peace. They are fatigued by the bomb shelters and the paralyzed economy.
Right.
But there is a dominant ideological push from the right-wing factions within the government. The sources feature direct quotes from the Israeli defense minister stating explicitly that the political goal is to occupy and potentially permanently annex southern Lebanon all the way up to the Litani River.
Annexing up to the Litani River. And the geopolitical historians draw a line between this and historical visions from 1918.
Right, exactly. But the strategic fallout of this policy is massive. The operation is actively preventing 600,000 Lebanese civilians from returning to their homes. And political analysts emphasize how counterproductive this is if the goal is to weaken Hezbollah.
How so?
Well, prior to this escalation, domestic reporting showed the Lebanese government and public were deeply resentful of Hezbollah. They wanted to sideline them. But the moment a neighboring defense minister publicly broadcast the intent to annex sovereign Lebanese territory...
The internal dynamic invert.
Exactly. The existential threat of territorial loss pushes the Lebanese populace right back into the arms of Hezbollah, viewing them as the only viable resistance force. It's a direct repetition of the 1980s.
So it's a self-feeding loop. But as brutal as the ground war is, the sources indicate the true center of gravity has shifted entirely to the waterways of the Persian Gulf.
Right. Yes. This is where we transition from a regional kinetic conflict to global economic contagion. Because the U.S. and Israel failed to achieve quick escalation dominance, Iran has been afforded the time to weaponize geography itself.
Let's talk about the Strait of Hormuz. Because for decades, the global economy has treated this choke point as a guaranteed open freeway policed by the U.S. Navy.
But as of day 33, the sources declare that freeway is gone. It has been replaced by a sovereign Iranian toll road.
A toll road. I love that phrasing. And the mechanics of this blockade are brilliant, honestly.
Yeah.
Iran is not just arbitrarily blowing up every commercial vessel.
Well, that would isolate them globally. Instead, they're running a highly selective, politically engineered extortion racket. Ships from friendly or neutral nations like China and Russia are granted safe passage.
But with a catch, right?
A huge macroeconomic catch. Iran is increasingly demanding that these shipments be traded and settled in Chinese yuan, aggressively bypassing the U.S. dollar system.
While any vessel carrying the flag of the U.S., Israel, or allied nations is strictly denied entry, the strait is closed to the west. And this geopolitical reality resulted in that bizarre U.S. political spin.
Oh, the Pakistani tankers.
Yeah. Donald Trump claimed that Iran granted a gift by allowing 20 Pakistani tankers to pass through the strait.
And economic analysts point out the stark irony there. If the former U.S. president has to frame the standard maritime passage of Pakistani vessels as a gift from Tehran, it inadvertently serves as a total admission of U.S. impotence in the Gulf.
It really does. It confirms that Iran holds absolute control over the gates. And this weaponization extends south to the Bab el-Mandeb Strait and the Red Sea, where Yemen's Houthi forces have virtually closed the waters.
Right. And the mechanism there isn't just the fear of a missile hitting a ship, it's the invisible architecture of global trade. Maritime insurance.
Exactly. When the Houthis successfully target commercial vessels, the actuaries in London calculate the war risk premium. If that premium spikes to 2 or 3% of the hull and cargo value, the voyage instantly becomes economically unviable. The insurers pull coverage.
And without insurance, massive logistics conglomerates simply will not sail. So what happens?
They physically turn around and sail all the way down the coast of Africa, rounding the Cape of Good Hope, which adds anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks of transit time to a single journey.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, to move a massive steel Leviathan an extra 3,500 miles, it has to burn an exponential amount of extra marine diesel. This is the mechanism driving the staggering numbers we see in the economic reports.
Yeah, let's hit those numbers. Australia is experiencing a 52% spike in diesel prices, with reports of 500 regional gas stations running completely dry. The United States is facing a 41% price spike.
And because the heavy logistics sector operates entirely on diesel, This cascades across every supply chain. That 41% spike in the US is immediately baked into the retail cost of your groceries, your electronics, everything.
Here's where it gets really interesting for you, the listener. You might not care about shipping insurance, but this is like applying a tourniquet to the global supply chain. Oil markets are reacting violently. Brent crude is sitting above $112 a barrel.
And the sources cite projections warning that without a sudden negotiated settlement, crude could realistically breach $150 to $200 a barrel.
But the crisis extends far beyond just fuel. The Gulf is the central nervous system of global manufacturing.
Right, we're seeing critical bottlenecks in helium, plastics, and crucially, fertilizers.
This is the quiet time bomb of the 33-day war. How does a missile strike in the Middle East translate to global famine?
It comes down to liquefied natural gas, or LNG. The kinetic strikes have reportedly knocked up to 70% of the LNG export capacity from Qatar and Iran offline, and natural gas is the primary feedstock required to synthesize ammonia.
Which is the foundational ingredient for global nitrogen fertilizers like urea.
Exactly. When the petrochemical plants halt production, the global supply of fertilizer plummets. Agricultural analysts map this out with terrifying clarity. If farmers in the global south cannot procure urea for the upcoming planting seasons, crop yields will collapse.
So they are mathematically predicting severe food shortages and potential famines in vulnerable nations within a 6 to 12-month window.
Unavoidably. And while this immense suffering is being programmed into the global economy, the financial monitors in our sources neutrally present some deeply troubling data regarding domestic U.S. market activity.
The insider trading anomalies. The data logs show massive block trades executing just moments before major policy shifts.
Highly specific timing. The reports detail $600 million in oil futures, alongside $1.5 billion in S&P 500 index futures, being traded exactly 15 minutes before the White House announced a temporary pause in strikes against Iranian energy facilities.
$1.5 billion. 15 minutes before the announcement. I mean, entities with advanced, classified knowledge monetize that intelligence to the tune of billions. It really highlights the financialization of modern conflict.
It does. And with the global economy being squeezed and political pressure compounding, leaders are rapidly running out of conventional options. This pushes them directly into what strategists call the escalation trap.
Right. You reach a point where admitting defeat is politically impossible, so you're forced to propose increasingly desperate solutions. The briefings indicate that over 50,000 U.S. troops have been sent to the Middle East.
And the political objectives detailed by a prominent U.S. senator in our sources are absolute. They are calling for the complete destruction of Iran's air force, navy, missile capabilities, and drone factories.
But to achieve that, air power alone isn't enough, thanks to the Granite Fortress. So the briefings circulate proposals for boots on the ground, like launching an amphibious assault to seize Karg Island or capturing the coastal territory along the Strait of Hormuz.
But military experts in the sources compare a ground landing to the disastrous 1915 Gallipoli campaign.
Oh, wow. Gallipoli.
Yeah. Attempting to land 10,000 to 50,000 U.S. Marines against an Iranian standing army of 1 million is deemed completely militarily unsound. It negates every technological advantage the U.S. possesses.
So if a conventional ground war is unfeasible, the escalation shifts to the water war. The sources detail Trump's threat to obliterate Iran's electric generating plants, oil wells, and water desalination plants.
And this introduces the massive risk of reciprocal escalation. The logic of deterrence dictates that if the U.S. and Israel target Iranian desalination, Iran will immediately target the desalination plants of Israel and the Gulf states.
And Israel relies on desalination for 80% of its drinking water.
Exactly. The horrific implication here is symmetrical destruction of water infrastructure. It would turn the region into an uninhabitable desert.
You can't survive without water in the Middle East for more than a few days. So if destroying this infrastructure ensures mutual destruction, why is it even being broadcast as a strategy? Is it pure bluff or a terrifyingly real option?
Well, when the line between bluff and execution blurs, we edge toward the darkest scenario in our sources. If conventional ground wars are off the table and mutual infrastructure destruction means suicide, what is the ultimate escalation?
The unthinkable horizon, nuclear proliferation.
Right. When conventional deterrence fails completely, the threshold for nuclear weapons usage drops dramatically. And the source material provides an analysis from an MIT nuclear weapons expert regarding exactly how close Iran is to crossing that threshold.
We need to walk through the cold, hard chemistry of this. According to the expert, Iran currently possesses roughly 430 kilograms of 60% high-enriched uranium, or HEU.
Existing in the form of a gas known as uranium hexafluoride.
Right. And 60% enrichment isn't a weapon. You need 90% for weapons-grade material. But the MIT analysis shows how fast that gap can be closed.
Yeah, it can be fed into multiple centrifuge cascades and elevated to 90% in a matter of weeks, or even days.
But you still can't put a highly volatile gas inside a warhead. So what are the actual chemical steps to militarize it?
It's surprisingly straightforward if you have the infrastructure. Once you have the 90% uranium hexafluoride gas, you expose it to high-temperature hydrogen fluoride.
Okay.
This converts the gas into green uranium tetrafluoride particles.
Then what?
You run those green particles through a standard industrial cyclone separator. Finally, you place the refined particles into a high-pressure crucible along with calcium or lithium. This leaves you with a solid ingot of 90% enriched uranium metal.
And the atomic math says that initial 430 kilograms of gas yields enough metal to produce 9 to 10 distinct fission bombs. This isn't science fiction. The sources are explicitly detailing the chemical steps, centrifuges, cyclone separators that bridge the gap between a regional conflict and global Armageddon.
And this raises an important question. Do they even need to test these weapons to know they work?
Right. During the Cold War, nations had to conduct underground tests. Does Iran have to test this?
The nuclear experts say definitively no. They do not need to test it.
How can you guarantee a yield without ever detonating a prototype?
Because of the gun-type assembly design, it's a simple design, like the Hiroshima bomb. It just uses conventional explosives to drive a uranium plug into a uranium sphere to create a critical mass. It does not need to be tested to guarantee it will work.
The physics are just that universally proven.
Exactly. Which forces us to confront the terrifying phenomenology if one of these weapons is actually utilized. If Israel strikes first or Iran retaliates, the real killer isn't the shockwave, but the resulting firestorms.
Yeah, the low-yield detonations create fireballs that superheat the air to 1,000,000 degrees.
And that vacuum violently sucks in oxygen, creating micro-tornadoes of hurricane-force winds 100 to 200 kilometers per hour. These feed massive urban fires, effectively turning subterranean bomb shelters into ovens. And radioactive rain would poison any survivors.
Which brings us to Israel's Samson option, a suicidal nuclear strike if the state faces catastrophic conventional defeat.
It is the absolute apex of the escalation trap. But, assuming we avoid nuclear annihilation, the world that emerges from this 33-day crisis will look fundamentally different than the one before it. Let's look at how this crisis has fundamentally accelerated the end of the unipolar world order.
Yeah, the fracturing of alliances, starting with NATO. The briefings highlight the Spanish precedent.
Right, where Spain formally refused to let its sovereign bases be used for U.S. power projection into the Gulf. Europe is realizing that it bears the brutal economic costs of an American war it didn't authorize.
Germany and France are dealing with deindustrialization and $112 oil, and Washington, prioritizing the Middle East, has forced the abandonment of Ukraine's supply needs. Kiev is left effectively disarmed as interceptors go to Israel.
Which leads us to a fascinating concept from the sources, thermoeconomics.
This completely shifts how you view global politics. Thermoeconomics argues that empires are essentially energy transformation systems subject to the laws of entropy. Society needs fuel for machines and food for people.
Right, and the core metric is energy return on investment, or ERY. The U.S. system is experiencing a contraction in its energetic efficiency. Fracking takes increasingly more energy to produce the next barrel, and the U.S. AI boom is heavily straining the electrical grid.
But compare that to the BRICS nations. The sources describe an inward turn, abandoning the old model of globalization for national security-led redundancy. China has spent 25 years actively insulating itself from a Strait of Malacca blockade.
Exactly. They pushed renewables, electrification, aiming for 30% of their truck fleet to be electric by 2030, and next-gen tech like thorium fusion.
So essentially, the global economy is realizing that a system built on perfectly timed, uninterrupted shipping lanes is incredibly fragile. We are watching the real-time death of hyperglobalization. The petrodollar is dying, and an $11 trillion shift to Asia is becoming irreversible as energy trading moves to the yuan.
It is a profound reshaping of the geopolitical map.
All right, let's summarize. In just 33 days, The pursuit of total victory has hit the impenetrable wall of the granite fortress. We've seen the Strait of Hormuz weaponized into a toll road, triggering a global economic and fertilizer crisis, while both sides flirt with catastrophic nuclear or infrastructure-based escalation. Ultimately, this conflict has accelerated the arrival of a multipolar world.
And that leaves you, the listener, with a final lingering thought. We've talked about empires needing energy sovereignty to survive the coming decades. But look at your own life. As global supply chains fracture and the era of cheap, easily accessible fuel ends, how energy sovereign are you? When the global systems you rely on for food and power face their own entropic decline, what is your personal resilience strategy?
A heavy question to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. Please keep a close eye on the news in the coming weeks as the theoretical scenarios discussed today are rapidly becoming reality. Stay safe, stay informed, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.